it feels like TV is exploring, particularly TV, is exploring kind of current issues much more quickly. And I do wonder if there's a place there for a new publisher or an imprint that works in a more similar way to film and TV. So maybe has like a team of writers, for example, and, purposefully selects out their stall as a more kind of avant-garde publishing house and really looks at everything from the technology of it to, how they speak to readers. And I won't say any more than that because I'm starting to think maybe I should do this.
No, you must.
I just need a millionaire investor.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Book People. I'm your host Aishwarya Zawalgekar, a writer, a book editor, podcast producer, and the head of originals at Bound. In this path-breaking video podcast, I demystify the publishing and creative industries and uncover the biggest opportunities and challenges for writers in India today. So when we talk about publishing, have you noticed we always talk about, how Indian books are doing in the Indian market, or we even talk about how books from the UK or US do with Indian readers, but we rarely ever look at how well Indian authors and Indian books can do in international markets. So that's what we're covering this time. And I have a special guest to host the episode this time. So Tara Khandelwal, who is the founder of Bound and who has been an editor for over 10 years, is hosting this episode. And she is talking to Katy Loftus. So Katy Loftus was the head of Penguin Random House UK, which is one of the biggest international publishers in the world. She has been responsible for publishing some amazing bestsellers, and she was actually even named Editor of the Year in 2021. So they're going to talk about what readership looks like in the UK, how Indian authors can break into that market, how important is social media when it comes to building this presence for authors, and why did she decide to leave this amazing job and go freelancing. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the Book People, Katy.
Thank you so much, Tara.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, very, very excited to have you here and get your perspective on all things publishing. So, obviously the first question, it's an obvious one, but I have to ask, you were the head of a major international publishing house, and you were named Editor of the Year in 2021. You sort of had this dream career that most of us editors want to have, working in the heart of publishing. So, you've made a monumental change recently in your career, and you decided to leave that position and, do something else and go freelance. So what prompted that decision?
Oh, starting in at the deep end. Yeah, like you said, it was really an amazing time that I spent in the world of publishing. I actually started off in academic publishing for a couple of years and then spent most of my time publishing fiction for Random House and HarperCollins, and then right at the end for Penguin, where I wasn't quite head of the whole company, although I love that. I was joint head of the imprint and running my list, and won that amazing award. I had a great year publishing The Thursday Murder Club and many other amazing novels. But I suppose you could encapsulate it as kind of burnout with a kind of double punch of depression as well. So the industry, as I'm sure you and colleagues are aware, both for editors and other members of the staff and authors, it's a really, high pressure kind of boiling pot, really. And I think partly because of the nature of books, it's so unpredictable. Nobody knows what book is going to kind of succeed, however you want to term success. But if we're talking financially, most books don't actually make much money. And it's just a few outliers that, like Richard Osman's novel, The Thursday Murder Club, that become absolute runaway successes. And so I think that unpredictability can really feed into this pressure cooker. I think, I also had kind of personal stuff going on, which I won't go into here, but I have suffered with depression kind of all of my life, kind of periods on and off. And I think the intense pressure I was under, partly because of those huge successes, meant that my brain was just dealing with a lot of stress, constantly, always working, feeding into that. And I think it just triggered a depressive episode in me. And I took some time out and really reevaluated everything. I still love books. I think the kind of big corporate world of publishing is maybe not for me, at least for a good while. I also trained as a yoga teacher, so I'm like ticking all the cliche boxes. But I am now back in the book world, but I'm working directly with authors on their manuscripts, which, when I took that time out to think about it, it wasn't kind of balancing budgets or, list strategy that really, I was good at it, but it didn't make me feel good. And it was the working with the books, with the authors that lifted me. And I think I hope I was good at it too. So that is what I'm focusing on now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, all of us sort of book people, editors, we get into the industry because that's the biggest high, right? Working with an author and making their book better. And also that high of finding that gem and finding something that's really, really good. I agree with what you're saying, that it's so sort of unpredictable. And that you wanted to make a change. So what do you think is the most sort of marked difference in your working style now versus, when you were in corporate publishing?
Oh, it's a great question. I suppose working freelance allows you to listen to yourself and to what you need. So to get all yoga on you, to listen to your body. I think I was being told for quite a few years, quite clearly by my body, that I couldn't really cope with the stress. But the world in which we live in, not just publishing, but, the corporate world, it doesn't recognize that. It expects, the same number of hours plus extra every week at the same time. And for me, the accumulation of that over 15 years, I had no choice but to change that. So now I schedule in work at times that work for me. I don't have to go to a lot of meetings, which we all know about meetings. We haven't really figured out a solution for them, but they just always go on forever. I guess bookish people in particular do love to talk.
That's
and
true.
talk around a subject. I have a lot of one-to-one meetings, which are a completely different thing, directly with the author or with some agents and publishers. But my time is mostly spent either doing that or just editing. And I think as someone who needs quiet and is a bit of an introvert most of the time, just doing that in my house. So that's another change. I'm working mostly from home. Just being able to do that in the peace and quiet makes a really big difference to me, and kind of working according to how I'm feeling that day, which is a luxury. And I'm very.
But you worked for that. You worked for that luxury.
I mean, we all say that, but also there are so many people that work really, really hard, and for whatever reason, I look back and I did work really hard and I did have good taste, but again, coming back to that unpredictability, I was lucky enough that some of the books that I worked on did really well, and that gave me essentially a higher salary and more bargaining power with the company that I worked for.
Yeah. So in terms of like those books that did really, really well, right? It's you saying you got lucky, but obviously, you have good taste. There's obviously some editorial instinct that is leading you to pick these books. So can you tell me a little bit more about that process?
Oh, this is the fun bit. So one of the fun bits. I think when I first started out, I think as a lot of people might identify with, I really doubted myself kind of editorially. I'd obviously read really widely, but you get a submission in the UK, I should say, books aren't submitted directly to us from authors. I think it's probably the same. Is it the same?
Yeah,
for you,
it's
Tara?
now the same. Yeah, that
So
they don't
it goes
accept
via an
unsolicited.
agent. Yeah. So yeah, as an author, you need to get a literary agent, and they have the connections with the book, with the editors in the publishing houses, and will also work with you, the author, on the text. So they are very useful people, but it does add another layer of kind of gatekeeping. But yes, so the normal process was I would get a book ping up in my inbox, all obviously electronic now, and it would come with an email from the agent kind of saying why they thought I should acquire it. I would normally get, on average, about 10 a week. So, if you think about the hundreds of thousands of people out there who are writing, millions of people, I should say, and then, slightly fewer who actually get to the end of a book, and then the fewer who get represented by an agent, there's this kind of whittling down process that goes on. So I was very aware that every book that came to me, had been through a lot already. There's always that moment of excitement when it comes, especially, there are some agents whose taste I shared, and I knew that they had a great eye for the market. And if something came up from one of them, I would immediately look at it straight away, if I wasn't in a meeting. And normally I would really scan the email. For me, I need to know the writing first. So I would open the first page and just read the first page. And normally in that time, I would know at least whether this is an author I think I can work with. Obviously, taste is subjective. As an editor, you hope that you've read widely enough that you know what makes a good sentence. And as a reader, you would know that too. You just do. Yeah. You open that first page. There are some books that almost everyone loves, and those are the books that I was looking for. So yeah, if I've read it and think, oh my goodness, this is amazing, I then go back and look at the email more carefully, look at what the plot is about. So we wouldn't normally get a synopsis from the agent. They would normally give us a kind of blurbed type summary. And if the book sounded like it was something a bit different to the other books on my list, if it sounded like something I knew my kind of sales, publicity and marketing teams would be able to sell well. So those kind of three things: the writing, the marketability, and what was the other thing I said? Whatever that was. I feel like I might need to answer that question again.
No, but I think what you said makes sense, and it is exciting when you just know. And I think what you said about reading widely also makes a very big difference, because sometimes, as editors, I personally, in my personal life, don't read a lot of crime thrillers, but that's one of the books, that's one of the genres that I love to edit the most. And that's because I've sort of read widely, even though I don't like, reading it for sort of my hobby. I've read enough of thrillers. I've read enough of each genre to know what's good, what's not good, what makes something interesting, and I think that is sort of very, very key.
And good storytelling is universal across genre.
Exactly.
And there's no real formula to it. But a writer either has it or they don't. They can work on their craft. But I do believe that this kind of gift for conveying a story is a gift that certain people have.
Definitely. And also you can't really get away from the marketing aspect of it nowadays, especially in a corporate publishing house. But I want to bring the conversation a little, there's this whole narrative amongst South Asians and maybe people of color who are trying to break into the Western publishing market. And there is a little bit of complaint or there is sort of conversation about how a lot of the stories that do get published by multinational publishing companies abroad in the UK and the US are all about sort of the struggles. And there's not enough stories about everyday lives of people, sort of like fetishizing, people of color. So what would you say, in response to that, or what would you say? Like, I don't want to sort of like put you on the spot, or have you sort of be a token either. But what I want to know is, the publishing houses in the West, how are they now looking at stories from people who are not living in the UK, not living in the US, people of color, different kinds of narratives? Is there more openness towards that? What kind of stories are doing well?
I think there are two things here. So there's the kind of Southeast Asian, South Asian people of colour in the UK. And then there's the kind of separate question of people living in other countries.
Yeah.
And, certainly if you're in the UK, it's more likely that we think, UK people want to read about people in the UK. I mean, I would challenge that as well. But there is definitely an openness across all the major publishers and obviously the indie presses for writers from every community across the UK. And, I acquired a lot of brilliant writers from lots of different communities on my list. And I know that that's still going on at Penguin. I think it's harder with writers elsewhere for some logistical reasons as well, that we generally, have relationships with agents who are based in the UK. So, if I were a writer in India, for example, and I wanted to get a book published in the UK, I would probably try to find a UK-based literary editor to kind of have that gateway into that world. I mean, speaking for myself, I loved and often did get submissions from authors from all over, but yeah, always via an agent. So you have that person you need to get through. There have been various initiatives, and I think there is a lot of debate about how tokenistic the initiatives can be as well. But one that I was part of that I feel really proud of was called Right Now, which is worth your viewers kind of looking up. I think you have to be based in the UK, but we should double check that because it could be open wider. And it's kind of like a mixture of kind of workshops and mentoring. So writers can submit a short sample. Every single one is read by an editor in-house. And then out of all of those that are read, 50 are chosen to come to a workshop. And they do 3 of these workshops a year in different cities all over the UK to make sure that it's completely, well, as accessible as is logistically possible. And there is help out there as well for people that, for example, need help with costs, transportation, etc. And they come along, there's like a whole day of amazing workshops and talks. They also each writer that attends gets a one-to-one with an editor. So I did quite a few of those workshops. And then at the end, 10 writers across those 3 yearly workshops get shortlisted, and they each get paired with an editor mentor who mentors them for a year. And many of those books that have come from that scheme, I think it's been going maybe 5 years now, that many of them have been published, and they're stories by writers from all over the world. So yes, it's definitely, things are opening up. It's still not a level playing field by any means. And you're completely right that there is still this kind of stereotyping, let's say, of the types of books we expect to see from people. But there are many amazing editors out there kind of who are really changing things and looking at things differently. And I think as they kind of rise through the ranks and become CEO eventually, then we really will see whole scale change.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, the responsibility of both parties. So it's the responsibility of the reader as well to seek out these new narratives, because ultimately at the end of the day, these publishing houses, they're corporates and they have to pander to audience demands. So, more initiatives like the one that you mentioned, more initiatives to get people to read about diverse voices are also important, because it all feeds into each other. In India, we sort of didn't have a lot of storytelling about the northeast of India, and it was sort of underrepresented. And now there's a lot of, a lot of stuff happening on social media, a lot of initiatives, indie publishing houses, looking for those voices. And now we see many more of those stories out there. So I think it's a two-way street, and hopefully, things will keep changing for the better. I want to know a little bit more about, reader behavior in the UK. So according to you, what are reading habits in the UK? Sort of, are people still buying from bookstores? Are they mostly listening to audiobooks, ebooks? What is it?
Oh, yes, another good question. There's been a lot of change, I think, partly because of the pandemic. Obviously, for a while, people weren't allowed to go into bookstores. So I think that has sped up what was already happening, which was a lot of people just buying online. We have one major bookstore, kind of high street bookstore chain in the UK called Waterstones, and they can really kind of make a book. They can have a really big share on a book in the market. However, for most authors with them, you're lucky if you get one book stocked. They just don't have the space. There are so many books out there, and they have to focus on the books that are already selling. So you get a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. Readers are still definitely going to them, and there has also been a kind of move towards independent bookstores in certain areas, I think, where there's more income, essentially. People, just like people are supporting their local coffee shops, people are trying to support their local bookshops. So there's kind of these two polar opposites. There's kind of online, get it as cheap as you can. Amazon is the biggest over here. And then there's, on the other hand, a few independent stores who are doing what they do really well and are actually thriving. And then in the middle, you have supermarkets who can sell a lot of copies. And that tends to be the more kind of commercial reads, books that are already popular, or authors that are really well known. And that tends to be readers who are doing their weekly shop. And they just, the stereotype is like a stressed mum, which is totally a stereotype. But I think this idea that someone who's buying a book as part of their weekly shop because they don't have the time to
books
go
in supermarkets. That's something we don't have here. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
There's actually
so there's
sort of
like kind of an entertainment aisle, so that there'll also be like, PlayStation games and stuff like that. And then books, I mean, they don't have a massive space there, but they are there.
Yeah, I think the way that Indians buy their groceries is also very different than in the UK. But that's definitely interesting. Yeah. What kind of genres, are working right now?
Crime and thriller is always big. It's always the biggest fiction genre. Celebrity books, actually both fiction and non-fiction, are huge. And that's a really big change we've seen over the last kind of 10 years or so, is basically anyone with a big platform has a much higher chance of getting published.
That's the same here.
Yeah. And then a much higher chance of doing well. It's just the route by which you speak to readers, and those routes are becoming ever kind of smaller, really, unless you're on social media.
Yeah, I think that in that way, there's a lot of similarity with, corporate publishing here as well, where you see a lot of influencers, lots of people who already have a channel getting published. And it makes sense, I mean, these are businesses at the end of the day. Another thing that everybody was concerned about was the Penguin and Simon and Schuster merger, which did not happen. What are your what are your opinions on this? What's your take? On the way that sort of like this new way of how publishing houses are also operating, whether it's sort of commissioning books from influencers or celebrities or pandering to these audience demands. What happens to, other stories? What happens to writers?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of authors out there rightly feel a lot of anxiety about this. In the end, as we've said a few times, the big publishers are corporate enterprises. And, if you're owned by shareholders, there's a board, you have to grow year on year, budgets are set. And so you are just chasing where the money is. There is within those corporates, some imprints that are enabled to still look for undiscovered authors who might not make a lot of money to begin with, but over time, well, it's seen as important that their work gets out there, but also over time they will gain a readership. And Hamish Hamilton is an imprint at Penguin where I used to work, and they were absolutely like that. So there is still some space there. And then the independent presses are doing really well in the UK at the moment. It is really tough because costs have gone up. There's a cost of living crisis at the moment in the UK. And when it comes to books, like paper, distribution, petrol, all of that has really grown. So it's harder for small publishers to make a living. But some are getting, their books listed in the major prizes, so that there is some attention there for new voices. In the end, I think we have to trust that an amazing new voice will get discovered, but it is tough.
I believe that, if it's good, we mentioned this before, if it's good, it's good. It will cut through the noise and it will find its readership. So we spoke a little bit about, how, people living outside of the UK, because I know a lot of, writers who want to access that market just because it's it's a much bigger market. The amount of English language readers we have in India is still very, very small compared to, the market in the UK and in the US. So, would you have any tips on how they can find these agents, approach them? Or what kind of stories these agents are looking for, what kind of writing these agents are looking for?
Yes, there's a couple of things I could say on this. So I think, first of all, if you want to find a UK agent, they are very searchable online. What I would recommend is finding an author who's published in the UK who you admire or think is similar to your writing, let's say, and then just look up who their agent is and approach them. And you can even say, oh, I noticed that you represent this person. I've written this, would you be interested in seeing it? And each of the agents has a website that says very clearly their submission guidelines. But most of them, it's a synopsis in the first 3 chapters. And then if they want to see more, they will see it. They will request it, sorry. But also there are a couple of other routes. So if you have an agent in India, they may well employ a sub-agent who is maybe based in the UK, whose job it is to sell in for that agent in the UK. So it could be worth, when finding an agent where you're based, to check whether they have routes into the UK market themselves. Then they're kind of shouldering the cost for that. Another option is, I used to get submissions sometimes from editors, or not so much a submission, but an editor in India would say, oh, I'm publishing this book. We have a sample in English, would you like to read it? So there is some sharing. So if you sign with, a multinational, an international publisher, they may well have ways, and it's worth talking to your editor then about whether you could explore that together. So yeah, there are a few ways there.
Yeah, I think, one just has to do the research and sort of reach out, and it may not be as big of a hurdle as it might seem.
There's so much online these days, like great advice for writers.
Yeah. So what do you think is the next opportunity for books?
Woo! That's a good question. I'm probably going to need a second to answer that. Some really interesting things are happening in the film and TV world. It feels like, without wanting to offend anyone in books, that they're slightly further ahead with just the way things are produced is so kind of avant-garde. Thinking particularly of the way women are portrayed, I think there's still a feeling, certainly in the UK, that women just want to read women's fiction or rom-coms, and that the characters have to be, attractive and often white and like cis. And it feels like TV is exploring, particularly TV, is exploring kind of current issues much more quickly. And I do wonder if there's a place there for a new publisher or an imprint that works in a more similar way to film and TV. So maybe has like a team of writers, for example, and, purposefully selects out their stall as a more kind of avant-garde publishing house and really looks at everything from the technology of it to, how they speak to readers. And I won't say any more than that because I'm starting to think maybe I should do this.
No, you must.
I just need a millionaire investor.
Yeah. No, and Reese Witherspoon's book club came to mind. The way that she's sort of creating this loop where she's, finding these books, publicizing them, and then like obviously boosting their sales because of that. And then using that to sort of make money for herself by licensing or producing these shows. So I definitely feel there's a lot of synergy between books, audio, and video, and even the way that books are made, like having a team of writers. That's a new idea as well. So if, an Indian author wants to get published in the UK, and I'll keep bringing it back to this, what would you say about, can they appeal to a UK audience without sort of compromising on certain cultural aspects? And which sort of books, from sort of like South Asia, either from South Asians living in the UK or living outside, have you seen do really well in the UK?
That's a good question as well. I don't think that writers will need to compromise on the kind of core of the story. What I would say is they probably need to have an understanding that for an audience in the UK, or indeed in any other country that's quite different to theirs, they might not understand certain things, really kind of normal things like, the name of, I don't know, a school or something that is just really obvious to you if you live there. So you might just within your writing need to give a little bit more of an explanation, in a kind of subtle way, so that someone who's not from your country can still understand what you're talking about. I'm trying to think of any books recently. To be honest, I probably can't answer that one. Haven't really been reading contemporary fiction for a year or so as part of my recovery. So
I know it makes sense. But that's a very interesting thought, because there's a lot of debate, and actually Indian readers get a little irritated when our writers who are publishing in India give cultural context So for example, there'll be books where a writer will say sari and then explain that. And I know a lot of sort of Indian readers who get a little irritated with that, because the idea is still that, when we write a book, we're always writing for an audience outside. So I just actually read a
There's
book.
definitely the possibility of
Yeah.
having a slightly different version
Yeah, that's what I
that
was
goes
gonna
out
say.
in the UK. I think that just makes most sense.
Yeah. So I was just going to say that usually what happens is there's two different versions. So I just read a very nice book by an Indian author called The Newlyweds. And it basically, what she does is she follows these three couples who have eloped and who run away from their families. And she follows them for 6 years, and we sort of see, the repercussions of getting married without family permission, because that's a thing in India. So one of the couples is intercaste, one of them is a lesbian couple, and one of them is an interreligious couple. And it was also published in the UK. So, the UK version obviously had a lot of explaining, in a subtle way, as you mentioned, and the Indian version didn't have that much. And I thought that was, a nice way to segregate that.
I think I've seen that book around, actually.
Yeah, it's a great book. You must read it. Yeah. My last question, and then I want to move on to our rapid fire round, which is the last session of this interview. Is I want to know what has been your most favorite book that you worked on? Can you tell me about that?
Oh God, I'm not allowed to say that. I'll get shot.
One of them.
Let's say it was special because it won the Costa First Novel Prize. So Sarah Collins' The Confessions of Franny Langton.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's my favorite book, but
one of
because I'm not allowed. But yeah, it's about a woman who was enslaved, who comes to, so it's a historical novel, who comes to Georgian England, and it's a crime novel. There's a murder, and these are her confessions, or are they? It's an amazing novel. It's kind of gothic, romantic.
Awesome! I'm going to pick it up after this. How exciting. You worked on so many different books, fantastic bestsellers, hits, all of the authors that you must know. It must be a really wonderful space to be in. Okay, so I know we don't have much time, so I'll quickly move it over to our rapid fire session. So what's a favorite book of yours?
Oh, I absolutely loved Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible as a teenager. I think rereading it now, as with many books, there are ways in which it's problematic. But for me, it was just the epicness of the novel and these 4 sisters and their voices living in the Congo as civil war loomed. And Barbara Kingsolver is a fantastic writer.
Amazing. I think the books that we read as children, they always stick with us. If you were to write a book, what would you write it on?
Oh. At the moment, me and a friend are talking about writing a comedic book set in the publishing industry, but that's mainly just for fun.
No, that would be good. Yeah, I would love to read something like that. Okay, your favorite genre to publish versus your favorite genre to read?
They're actually both the same. I love reading and I love publishing historical fiction. All different kinds. So from kind of Wars of the Roses to, Victorian, much more recent. There's something about stepping into a completely different world to your own, and the way in which you write to do that. And then publishing them is so much fun. There are readers out there who are just as passionate about it. They might not be, massive money makers always, but you get to have so much fun with the cover and with the copy, and the events that you do. It's the dream.
I am with you. I love historical fiction. It's my favorite genre to read. So
we'll
I
have
really
to
want
swap reading lists.
Yeah, that's
after
what
this.
I was like. I want to like continue this conversation and get into reading and the books that we like. But I know we're running out of time. So the last one is 3 historical fiction novels you think everybody should read.
Oh gosh, that's the hardest question ever. I think, I should have a look on my shelves. Of course, Hilary Mantel.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quite tempted to say all 3.
Yeah.
For sure. She was just a genius. And I think I would probably say Bringing Up the Bodies, her second one, is my favorite.
Yeah.
I think she really got into her stride with that. And but everyone should read all 3, because but I'm gonna have 3 for 1 with that one.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Katy. I have so many questions. This has been so insightful. I would have loved to continue talking to you for hours and hours about books and publishing and editing, but this was just fantastic.
Me too. Thank you so much, Tara. Thanks everyone for watching.
That marks the end of another episode of The Book People. Tune in every Thursday for some breakdowns, some truth bombs, and some insightful and real conversations with industry experts about all things books. This podcast is created by Bound. We work with writers and brands to create content across formats, whether it's books, podcasts, newsletters, or screenplays. So get in touch to see how we can help you grow through stories. And follow us at Bound India on all social media platforms. I'm your host, Aishwarya Zawalgekar. You can follow me on LinkedIn, where I share many more insights about books and content. Or you can get in touch with me at aishwarya@boundindia.com if you have any suggestions on topics I should cover, or if you want to book any of my services or consultation calls. Until then, keep writing.